available. So we are now recording. And I lost my water. Ah, there we go. It's not easy to lose. All right, let's see what's up with the chats. Participants, yeah, syllabus has most stuff. I think we'll have stuff coming in on time. We will be behind for a while, but we'll be caught up before we turn anything in. Not a random article, it's an article, a scholarly article over your topic for your research paper. That gets you started on your research paper in the first week. You've looked at the story, you've read an article, you've started to interact with it, and that's the basis of a research paper. So that's why we do this. Also, upper level courses in some majors require this kind of assignment, and this way you'll have a little experience with it. And it needs to be 10 pages, yeah. And I do think we got that part on the video, right? So yeah, if you need to review, but also there are notes there and also a podcast. So there are several ways you can get the information. Let's take a look at that. Share screen.
Dr. Magee.
Yes.
I have a question for you. If we were to choose an article or a topic and then find an article and write about that for the article analysis, if we were to discover another topic later on and change our mind as far as what we're going to write a report about, would we be able to do that? Or is this
that'd be fine. There are always a few people that wind up doing that. It's just extra work for you.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So me being lazy, I would try to, maybe we're in the wrong class. I'm in 103, not 102. All right, let's try that again. Here we go. Let's blow it up some to make it visible on tiny screens. So yeah, we talked about the article analysis last time, and I think, let's see, lecture. I thought I had a YouTube video. Oh, here it is. Okay. So yeah, I forgot to record the introduction to the course, but there is an audio version that you can listen to. But also down here, I did remember most of the, to record the, Mike describing the assignment. And also there's a lecture there. So there are several ways to listen to it. Read over the notes carefully and in order. The only thing I've changed is we don't need to submit the article, just put the link in your bibliography. And if I want to double check the article, I can just click on that and go to the article online. I'm assuming you're going to try to stay out of the library. It's one of the least fun COVID party options at your disposal. All right, any other questions before we set sail?
Nope.
I hear something? All right. I'm trying to fix my microphone. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I bought a microphone. So, where am I? Yes, here we go. So I'm really official. I'm still using my computer cam and it looks sucky, but whatever. I've got a face made for radio anyway. Okay, so let's start talking about young Goodman Brown. This is a famous story by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, Hawthorne was living in the early 19th century, 1800s, looking back at 1692. Oh, hold on. Maybe I have notes. There we go. All right, so bottom left of, this is after, so it's got the whole board worth of stuff. We are a day behind still, so just instead of reading, gosh, instead of reading this, which we normally do in period 2, we're still working on young Goodman Brown. The introduction. So just remember that we're a day behind for the time being. We will catch up in the fullness of time. Okay, so setting is 1692. What famous event took place in New England, and especially Massachusetts, and especially Salem in 1692?
Salem witch trials.
Salem witch trials.
Yes, exactly. And so we have the infamous Salem witch trials, and this is one story where he rewrites it in a slightly alternative universe. What if instead of the witch trials taking place with the general hysteria that we usually react to the, it's called a moral panic. It's something we have over and over in American society, the idea that somebody within our body politic is sapping the moral rigor of our people. When I was a kid, it was rock and roll. Wait, how do you do that? And, if you played the records backward, there were demon sounds on them. Nowadays, of course, well, not now exactly, but more recently, there was this moral panic over rap, the rap that the kids are singing and listening to. And then it moved from music to video games about 20 years ago. And we were having hearings about video games and people playing video games and getting their minds melted. And so it's always something. Sometimes these are political. Such as the commies in the 50s, the commies and the hippies in the 60s, the terrorists that you have grown up with this ginormous fear of terrorism. They were able to, 20 years ago, kill 3,000 Americans on 9/11. And of course, now we're doing that every 2 or 3 days with COVID, and nobody seems to, it's like, whatever, do I really have to wear this mask? So Hawthorne publishes this in 1835. He is not a Puritan. He's living halfway between 1692 and us. And there's as much difference between 1692 and him, maybe more so, as there is between his time and our time. It's a very different era, but he immersed himself in the Puritan period and read a lot of stuff that none of us have read to learn about it. And so his fiction, while reflecting 1835 in some ways, is able to portray 1692 in others. There are questions. All right. So we had a question about name significance. And here we get to the term allegory. This is an important word for literature, especially for Hawthorne. He's very allegorical in his writing. And allegory simply means a story with multiple levels, where the symbolic level holds together and follows the plot. So most stories have some level of symbolism, but in an allegory, it's thoroughgoing. It goes through the whole story. So young Goodman Brown, he's the protagonist of the story. What does his name mean in the context of an allegory? On the literal level, he is a young man. What's young in Puritan times to get married? 16, 17, maybe 18. Goodman, this is important because to know this is not a name. This is a title. We use Mr., Miss, Ms. These are all alternative variant forms of master and mistress to show respect to somebody. Oh, well, hello, master. Mr. and Ms. and Mrs. all kind of mean that. Now, there was this word, Goodman, that was used in English to refer to a yeoman. But for the Puritans, they dusted it off and said, let's use it instead of Mr. And if you're a good woman, you could call them good woman, or you could call them goody. See, goody Clois. We think goody gumdrops or goody two shoes or goody goody. These all go back to the Puritans. And so it just means Mr. Young Mr. Brown. And Brown is simply his last name here. And he's been on the symbolic level, on the kind of spiritual level, though, young in this case, he's been married for 3 months in the literal universe. That means in the symbolic universe, he's been a church member for 3 months. He's been married to faith. Married to faith means you've become a full Christian. So young Goodman Brown, well, there's a debate over what it means. Everything in the story is debated because Hawthorne makes it very hard to understand what's going on. So on the one level, it could just be your generic everyman. Everyman was one of those early allegorical figures, I think from the medieval period, which could mean anybody in the world. So young Goodman Brown could typify just any person in the world. Other scholars say no. For the Puritans, a good man or a good woman was by definition a Christian. You had to be a Christian to be good. And so calling him Goodman is a way of recognizing his Christianity. I'm going to dot over that. Is that blinding you guys? Has everybody just left? Is anybody there? Everybody's put their screen on mute.
I'm here.
Okay, good. Just wanting to make sure. For the Puritan, in order to be good, you had to be Christian. However, other scholars than that have come along and pointed out that Puritans didn't think your generic Christian was good. They only thought Puritans were good. They talked about papistry when they talked about Catholics. Ever since the whole Spanish Armada thing, the British had been really negative about Catholicism, and the Puritans would have inherited that. They hated Catholics more than the Anglican Church, which was basically modeled on Catholicism, and the Puritans wanted to purify the church and get rid of all the lingering a notion of Catholicism that was in the church and make it more and more Protestant, more and more Calvinist. So for these scholars, young Goodman Brown, in the context of 1692, would mean that he was a young Puritan. And in some ways, the more specific you are with your interpretation, the more universal it can become. Once you understand that he is representing a person of this time and place, then you can start to say, well, how is this time and place like ours, such as our continual need for witch trials. We always have to have those every few years in America. All right, so the wife, Faith, who is at least as young as young Goodman Brown, maybe younger. What's young to be married in Puritan America? I don't know, 14, 15 if you're a woman. What does she represent? Well, she represents the Christian faith. And if you notice when you read the story, any time that you see the word or the name faith, it also can be read as the Christian faith. Like when Goodman Brown calls his wife poor little faith. When he talks about, but what of faith? When he says, my faith is gone. When he says, faith, faith, look to heaven and resist the wicked one. Shrinking from the bosom of faith. All of these can be read on the, for me, I'm going to take it as a Puritan. You can argue any one of these. It's perfectly respectable. Good scholars argue these points all the time. But that's the one I'm.
I think you muted. I can't hear you.
Of course I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Anybody? Okay, great.
Yes, you sound fantastic.
Oh, wow. And tell me how awesome I look, and then I'll know you're lying. Okay, so the Puritan and his relationship to his faith is represented by young Goodman Brown and his wife, Faith. So there was this thing in the Puritan church. They were something called Calvinists, and we'll get to Calvinism by and by. But they believed that you're either elect to go to heaven or you're damned to go to hell, and that it was all up to God. But they kind of noticed that if your parents went to church, you were more likely to go to church. And so they came up with what they call the halfway covenant, which I don't think is written down, which is like you're born halfway into the church. But then at some point you have to make your own decision. You come before the church, you tell them that you believe in, Jesus and all the other stuff, and that you are part of the elect. And then they question you to look for signs of election. And it's basically you get up there and say something like, I don't smoke, drink, or chew, and I don't date girls that do. All right, so he's been a church member in full standing for 3 months. The sable form in the forest, Goody Clois actually names him the devil, and he represents on the level of spiritual rating or symbolic rating temptation. And there are 3 forms of temptation. 3 forms of temptation. It comes to us through the world, the flesh, and the devil. So the devil is just this idea of a literal devil. Oops, wrong shoulder. There's an angel on my right shoulder and a devil on my left shoulder. And the angel has wings and is wearing white, and the little devil on my left shoulder is in a red jumpsuit and has horns and a tail. It's telling me to do naughty, naughty things. But temptation comes in other forms as well. So the world tempts us. You drive down the interstate, you see these huge billboards. They're called advertisements. You turn on TV, you turn on YouTube. If you're cheap like me, you don't pay for the expensive YouTube. You just growl while the commercials are playing. But every now and then one will come on that hits something in you and tempts you. But in order to tempt you, the devil and the world have to appeal to something within us in the flesh. So you go to the cafeteria and you go to the dessert slash salad bar. You know, imagine they're all right there together, the desserts and the salads. And your better self is telling you, get the salad. And then the devil is telling you, get the pie. The world is the pie, you know, that is the temptation the world presents. But then there has to be something in you that makes you hungry for pie. If I don't like pie, then it's not a problem. So that's what the sable figure represents. Goody Clois, Deacon Gookin, and the parson all represent good older Christians who embody the virtues of Puritanism. So he sees them day by day being good Puritans. In the daylight in the story, he's in Salem Village. The Puritans thought they were building a city on a hill because Jesus said a city on a hill cannot be hid. And their idea was that they were going to come to the new world away from all the temptations of the old world, and they were going to set up a holy society, a Christian utopia. A utopia is a good place. And when it's a Christian utopia, we call it a theocracy, which is rule in theory by God, but in practice being ruled by the church. So this is a specifically Christian society, specifically Puritan, and they wanted to show the world how great things would be if you only had, you know, the Christians being the ones living there and the ones running things. And it kind of toddled along for a few decades until 1692, when they had this mass hysteria and Salem witch trials and kind of upset the apple cart as far as anybody believing this was a utopia. Now, Goodman Brown is leaving this area at sunset, going into the wilderness at sunset as it gets darker. So the woods, also called the howling wilderness and unconverted wilderness, this is the area he's at night. We think of nature as being this small remnant that we haven't destroyed of the planet yet. So there are a few wilderness areas, but most woods we don't see as very scary. For the Puritan, and even to some extent still in Hawthorne's time, they're living in a thin strip of civilized, Christianized European society at the edge of a vast wilderness. You could be a squirrel and start at the Atlantic and run all the way to the Mississippi River and never have to touch ground, just run from one tree to another to another. So what does it mean to be unconverted? It means two things. One, it's not Christian yet. And how do you make it Christian? Well, you move Christians in, they build churches, they build cemeteries, they build schools, little towns, and little by little convert the wilderness from howling, devilish wilderness into your Christian theocracy. And so bad stuff takes place, naughty stuff, people being sinful. They go out into the woods to sin. Why? Because in town, everybody's watching them and you don't want the neighbors to know what you're up to. So you sneak out in the woods and you get the mushrooms and you cow tip and you pray to Satan and all the other stuff that, you know, the people are getting into. Okay, I think that's it for that slide. Okay, let's talk about Calvinism. Calvinism is the theology of John Calvin, who lived in Geneva, Switzerland. He was the most Protestant of the Protestant, very rigorous in the way that he thought. And so he came up with this system of theology that basically intensifies average Christian theology. So, the Christian theology that all Christians kind of inherit is that of, especially in the West, is that of the Roman Catholic Church. In the East, it's the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the two overlap quite a bit in the early centuries. But when you split off from the church, you've got to have something that makes you different. So with Calvin, you can summarize Calvinism with, I think that's acrostic, is that right? TULIP, T-U-L-I-P. Normally I would write just TULIP and then fill the rest of this in as we go. So for Calvin, the T stands for total depravity. And it takes the generic Christian doctrine of original sin. And actually, I think this would be also true for generic Jews and generic Muslims, the idea that there was an original sin. Of course, the original sinners are Adam and Eve, who were living in the Garden of Eden. And the serpent came to Eve, and in this sable figure is associated with the serpent. He has a walking stick that looks just like a serpent and seems to wiggle. So maybe it is a serpent. So he tempts Adam and Eve, or Eve. Eve eats the fruit and then gives it to Adam. She tempts Adam. And so that is original sin. And the idea is that in their sin, we all did fall. It had an effect on the rest of us. But the question is, within Christianity, how much of an effect? So let's... Okay, so in the ancient church, this debate raged over how much did we fall when we fell? How complete is the fall? How much help then do we need in undoing the fall? And so there was this ancient theologian named Pelagius, and he came up with the Pelagian theory that in Adam and Eve, we just get off track a little bit, but the human image of God is still basically good. And all we really need is somebody to set an example for us. And so Jesus came and set that example, and all we need to do to be good and to go to heaven is follow his example. Did any of you go to Christian camp and make those little bracelets with WWJD when you were a kid? Do y'all know what that is, WWJD? Somebody answer.
What would Jesus do?
Yes, what would Jesus do? And then what do you do? After you ask and answer the question, what do Jesus do? Then what do you do?
You do what Jesus does.
Yes. And so you follow his example and you wend your way to heaven. And Augustine, St. Augustine of Hippo, came along and said, no, that's way too optimistic. People are way too messed up for that. He was closer. Humans are depraved. So we need an actual atonement by Jesus. So all the stuff Jesus did, walking around, healing people, sermonizing, fussing with the disciples, fussing with the Jews, it's just filling in time until he could die. The really important thing is the death on the cross. And what we called Atonement Propitiation. So on the cross, Jesus paid the penalty for our sins. And in this one, the imago Dei, the image of God, is completely marred. And there's no way for us to do good. A lot of times, there were Christians who thought, why is this not moving? I forgot what I was going to say. A lot of Christians held to the theology that the body or the flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. Jesus said that, right? And so the spirit is good. It's the flesh that leads us astray. And spirit is associated with mind and reason. So before Adam and Eve fell, what was 2 plus 2? Anybody?
4.
4. Or if you prefer, whatever God said it was. But I prefer to think 4. After Adam and Eve fell, could they still do simple math? Probably. If they could ever do math, they could do it then. So in this theory, the mind, the spirit, is all right. And it's in this war with the flesh and just needs to overcome it through, devotion and willpower and whatnot. But for the Calvinists, the mind, the reason, the spirit, these are also fouled up by the fall, so that we are marred in our minds, in our spirits, as well as in our reason. And in fact, the worst sins are the spiritual ones. So of the 7 deadly sins, which is worse, pride or lust?
Either one is
Lust.
worse.
Well, both are bad, but pride is the one that really gets you, right? Lust is a sin of weakness. Pride is a sin of, arrogance. And it's a lot harder to deal with your own arrogance because you don't think you need to. Okay, so the semi-Pelagian view is the Catholic kind of splitting the difference. It doesn't look right, but I think it is right. Catholicism kind of splits the difference. You do some works. You also need to be absolved by the priest. So, it's a little one, a little of the other. And the Calvinists came along and said, oh, that's not nearly strict enough. We want the full metal jacket view of original sin, and we can call it total depravity. So we are completely and utterly depraved as a result of original sin. We may be in the image of God, but that image has been twisted out of, until it's unrecognizable. Now, if the fall isn't so bad, then salvation doesn't have to be so radical. But for the Calvinists, because we are totally depraved, that means nothing we do that we think is good really impresses God. So, I do a lot to take care of my elderly mother, but God knows that I resent having to do it. And that So he knows. I run into a building a burning building to save some people from being burned to death, which is good, but that makes me really proud of myself. And I go on TV and talk about how great I am. So not so good. So for the Calvinist, every good thing we do has the tinge and the stain of original sin. Okay, election. We have a different meaning of that word today, where we elect somebody. In this election, there's only one vote. It's God's vote. And he elects if you're going to be saved. He elects if you're going to be damned. And how does he do so? Well, it's just by his will. I will these people to be saved. I will these other people to be damned. And that's that. Nothing they can do will make me elect them. Nothing they can do is so bad that I will unelect them. So in some respects, our behavior is irrelevant to our salvation. It's something I've never really understood about Calvinism. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. So maybe the better word than election would be selection. And within the broader Christianity, God chooses people to be saved. We see him calling, but most Christians, like the Baptists I grew up with, liked John 3:16, for God so loved the world. So he sent his son into the world to save whosoever believeth in him. So it's like God elects and then we respond. But for the Calvinist, our image of God is so marred that we can't even respond by saying yes. So he has to say yes for us. That means his election of us has nothing to do with our response, or nothing to do with what we've been doing all our lives. It's just God chooses some people to go to heaven and some people to go to hell. Now, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So in the general Christian universe, Jesus atoned for our sins. In Pelagianism, he's just mainly setting an example for us, but for the more Augustinian view, he's paying the price for the sins we've committed. So that somehow it's like if I get a speeding ticket and my dad pays the ticket for me. That's what Jesus is doing. These sins demand punishment, and so Jesus takes that punishment on himself. Now, again, that's not cool. Again, for the Calvinist, they put a spin on this because most Christians believe that Jesus died for anybody who is willing to be saved. But for the Calvinist, that would mean some of the blood of Christ is going to waste in the form of the people who aren't being atoned, and God wouldn't waste the blood of Jesus. So Jesus only died to atone the elect. So if you've been the elected, then Jesus died for you. If not, he didn't. So imagine if we were sitting in a regular class and I came in and I just waved my arm to the right and said, everybody on this side of the class gets an A. And I waved my arm to the left and said, everybody on this side of the class makes an F. Aren't you glad we're online? Well, that's how Calvinism works. Jesus chooses people, and God chooses people at random to be saved or to be condemned. Everybody deserves to be condemned, but God, in his infinite or finite mercy, chooses some number of people to be saved anyway. And so who are we, the rest of us who are going to hell, to be so... to complain about going to hell? We deserved it anyway. Okay, irresistible grace. This is part of predestination. In general Christianity, we believe we're saved by grace. In Calvinism, it's irresistible. So for most Christians believe you can say no to God. The Calvinists believe God makes you an offer you can't refuse. You can't say no to him. Well, it looks like I've got some heavenly shining down while I'm giving this. I just noticed that. So for most Christians, you can say no. For Calvinism, you cannot say no. If God tells you you're going to heaven, you can't say no to that. If you say you're going to hell, you can't say no to that either. Now, perseverance of the saints. Most Christians believe in some kind of assurance of salvation. But Calvinism, I mean, this was the last bit of Calvinism my Baptist upbringing held on to. We always said, once saved, always saved. And the idea is if you are placed on the path by God, the path to heaven, then you will get to heaven. God's not going to slip up and let you drop. Which can lead, there are two problems this leads to. Okay, there's a big word. Are you familiar with it? Anybody know what Antinomianism?
Nope.
Nomos is the Greek word for law, and anti is the Greek word for anti. So antinomianism means anti-law, anti-legalism. So it's the idea that there's nothing I can do if I'm elect that will unelect me. So I may as well have a good time. So my Christianity is a kind of divine fire insurance that'll make sure I get into heaven, but won't interfere with the way that I live. On the flip side, it can become very legalistic. Most of the Calvinists I've known are pretty legalistic in spite of their theology, and I'm not sure how they get to it. There is another major problem with Calvinism for the Calvinist, and it has to do with epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge. Let's suppose we're, again, sitting in class, and I ask you if you have a TV in your dorm room. Most of you are going to say yes, right? You've got some sort, maybe it's a iPad that you watch your shows on, but you've got something there to watch things. How do you know that it's in your dorm room? That's epistemology, right? Could your roommate have sold your stuff while you were in class and used it to buy drugs and throw a COVID party? Well, of course. So how then do you verify that you do indeed still have a TV? Anybody?
You go back and check.
Yes, you go back and check. And so God has picked some people to go to heaven and some people to go to hell. How do I know which group I'm in? How do I go check?
With the head of the church or a priest or something?
Well, they may be going to hell too, right?
With God themselves?
Well, I may be fooling. It might be Satan pretending to be God. There's only one way to find out. What is it?
You die.
You gotta die. And for most
okay.
of us, that's not enough. We need to know now. You know, I've got to find out now. I need the most important thing, if you're a Calvinist, the most important thing for you to know is if you're elect or as if you're damned. Because if you're damned, why are you going to go to all the trouble of being goody-goody when you could at least be enjoying your life in the meantime and, you know, have something to actually pay for in hell? Imagine sitting in Puritan church for 80 years with all those horrible, boring hymns and endless boring sermons, and then ending up in hell. How terrible would that be? So the most important thing for a Calvinist to know is, am I elect, or am I, what's the other word? Is it damned, reprobate? Oh, you know, am I among the damned? Damned will do. So am I elected to go to heaven, or am I elected to go to hell? But I can't know it. And therefore it leads to a lot of psychological problems. There was this guy, Josiah Hawley. Yeah, he was a Puritan, and he was so worried about whether he was going to heaven or hell that he slit his own throat. I mean, you know, shooting yourself is one thing. Slitting your throat, man, that takes some dedication. There was a woman who was, she didn't know, am I going to heaven or am I going to hell? I need to know. So she threw her baby in the well, just so she would know she was going to hell. But then she ran inside and told them what she had done, and they'd fished the baby out. So maybe she's going to heaven. It's impossible to know, right? And so they looked for signs of election. Maybe this is a sign that I have been elect. But of course, is it really a sign of election? How do we know that we know that we know that we're saved? That's unanswerable. You can't know it. And so it makes us really, you know, like focus laser-like on our own position in the universe. And it's really hard to take emotionally, especially when you put a lot of stock in this stuff. You know, what's not so hard to do is worry about the level of salvation of our neighbors. That's actually fun. Is my neighbor elect, or is my neighbor going to hell? As I can enjoy looking at my neighbor out of the windows and following them around town and speculating about what they're getting up to. You know, Christian judgmentalism is a fundamental part of the American church, where we watch each other and judge each other. And in the witch trial, it just went a step beyond, where you are looking at your neighbor, judging your neighbor, and then burning your neighbor at the stake, or hanging them, or crushing them with rocks, or however your various ways you want to use of killing your neighbor in order to rid society of its impurity. So the witch trials were a crisis of epistemology, as is every moral crisis, you know, or every one of these witch trials. You know, who's a terrorist? If we were sitting in class, I would start pointing at black backpacks, because everybody's got a backpack, right? And what's in that backpack? Is it water and a sandwich, or is it a bomb? Are you a terrorist? And we only need to start saying that for a few minutes before we all start getting the shivers and start getting a little panicked, because we don't really know who's a terrorist or a communist or a hippie. Well, you kind of know the hippies, because, you know, they're not wearing shoes and they've got on tie-dye. At least they did back in my day. I kind of miss the hippies. A hippie is one of those things, you can't be a secret hippie. You're just a hippie. But most of these you can pass in some way or another. And so figuring out what people are in their essence versus what they appear to be, that's a core concern for the Puritan in general, but especially during the witch trial. So this is what we get into in the story of young Goodman Brown. He goes out into the wilderness. He sees our old best Christians, Goody Clois, Deacon Gookin, the parson. He sees his parents, even his dead relatives out there in the witches' circle in the woods. And so what he's learning is that Puritans, even the most devout Puritans, are just as depraved as everybody else. So, he's basically locked in on that first principle of Calvinism. And that's an argument that one scholar makes, that he discovers the true Puritan faith and how grim it was. And people have been arguing about, we'll get into next period, what exactly we mean by faith. But let's look at the end of the story. So for Goodman Brown, he goes out into the woods and discovers that all these people that had been presenting such devout, pious exteriors are actually in secret worshiping Satan. And this was part of the witch trial. You would, your cow would die. And I saw Goody Clois out near my corral. And then 3 days later, my cow died. She must have gone out there and put a hex on my cow. Nobody likes a hexed cow, right? So when Goodman Brown comes back into town, he has a very different view of the people that he's been seeing day by day. The next morning, young Goodman Brown came slowly into the street of Salem Village. So back in the rational, Christian, civilized world in the daytime, having spent the night in the howling wilderness. Staring around him like a bewildered man, the good old minister was taking a walk along the graveyard to get an appetite for breakfast and to meditate his sermon, and bestowing a blessing as he passed on Goodman Brown. Goodman Brown shrank from the venerable saint as if to avoid an anathema. Now, an anathema is, I believe, an Aramaic word for a curse. And let's blow this up. I forget some of your screens aren't as big as mine. There we go. So, the narrator is using a lot of irony. Is he a good old minister, or is he an anathema? We don't know. And more importantly, Goodman Brown doesn't know. That's what this whole story is about, is the crisis of epistemology, which blends over into a crisis of faith. But if you notice all the seem words, all the maybe it was moving like a snake, maybe not. He heard people that he did not actually see. So were they really there, or was it the devil throwing his voice? Stuff like this. And all his life, he's seen this same preacher walking the same path around the graveyard every day, and thought that was a sign of his goodness. But now it could be a sign of his hypocrisy. What about Deacon Gookin? He was at domestic worship, and the holy words of his prayer were heard through the open window. What God doth the wizard pray to, quoth Goodman Brown. Now let's unpack that a little bit. What is domestic worship? What does domestic mean? Just buzz yourself in. Domestic? Nobody knows? Is everybody gone?
I'm here.
Tell us what domestic is.
Domestic is... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is relating to the running or home or to the family?
Yes. It has to do with the household.
You talking about that domestic or?
Yes, that's it. That's it exactly. It's having to do with house and home. It's from the Latin word domus, which means home, like domicile. And how do we know Deacon Gookin is praying at home?
Because he's at home.
Yeah, but how do we know he's praying at home?
We don't.
Yes, we do. It
We
says
ask
it.
his wife.
No, look at the sentence. Old Deacon Gookin was at domestic worship, and the holy words of his prayer were heard through the open window. So how do we know he's praying?
We hear him through the window.
We hear him through the window. Now, let me ask you this. How did Jesus say we should go about our domestic worship? You guys really got to start going to Sunday school.
Publicly.
No.
I think it says, and I may be quoting it incorrectly, it's something about going into a quiet place or a closet, I believe.
In the King James, I think it's in the Sermon on the Mount.
A prayer closet.
Yes, which could be just a regular closet, right? But thou, when thou prayest, enter into, well, we missed the context, Matthew 6, 5 through 6. When thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. Now, how are we supposed to pray as Christians according to Jesus?
Secretly, in private.
Secretly. So the reward for the person who prays in public is that people know he's praying in public. And if it's a religious-y sort of community, they will look up to him. So my dad was a Baptist preacher, and every summer we would take these vacations and end up in at McDonald's or somewhere like that. And my dad, being a Baptist preacher, had to bless the food long and loud. Basically, I'm trying to hide under the table. When will he shut up? And how cold are these fries going to be before I get to eat one? I never got a hot fry when I was growing up. It explains a lot. So yeah, loud worship is for the sake of other people. And he specifically went in all of his house. Where did he go? He went to the open window. Why? Maybe for fresh air, or maybe so the neighbors could hear his holy prayer. And so that would make him a hypocrite, right? So is Deacon Gookin really praying to God, or is he praying for public approval? Goody Clois, that excellent old Christian, stood in the early sunshine at her own lattice, catechizing a little girl who had brought her a pint of morning's milk. Goodman Brown snatched away the child as if from the grasp of the fiend himself. So what is catechism?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What is catechism? Go ahead. Anybody been through catechism?
It's a summary of a doctrine.
Right, that you give in question and answer form, right? Here we go. A Buddhist catechism, I guess that'll do. Of what religion are you? The Buddhist. What is a Buddhist? One who professes to be a follower of our Lord Buddha and accepts his doctrine. Let's see if there's a Christian one, since we're talking about. Oh my goodness, this is an old one. Look at those long S's. Oh, go away, go away. Not you guys. What special act of providence did God exercise toward man in the estate wherein he was created? So that was Goody Clovis. And the little girl says, when God had created man, he entered into a covenant of life with him upon the condition of perfect obedience, forbidding him to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil upon pain or of death. Goody Clovis, did our first parents continue in this state wherein they were created? Little girl, our first parents being left of the freedom of their own will, fell from that estate wherein they were created by sinning against God. Goody Clovis, what is sin? Little girl, sin is any want of conformity unto or transgression on the law of God, etc., etc. So this is part of what you have to do in order to prove you're elect. You have to know this body of Christian doctrine. Anyway, seeming, appear, perhaps. If the central problem of the witch trials was this epistemology, how do I know that my neighbors are real Christian? Hawthorne wants to make that our problem as well. So he makes this a very hard story to figure out exactly what's going on, because the narrator leaves all these question marks. Witches' Sabbath is simply, witches getting together and worshiping Satan, usually by, doing naughty things like sex and putting on animal heads and dancing around the fire. And it's a lot of fun. You should go. Yeah, what is it that causes Goodman Brown's tragedy? Yeah, that's a little hard.
I mean, when you think about it, it was a multitude of things that caused his downfall.
Really probably is overdetermined. I like that. But when Hawthorne talks about young Goodman Brown's present evil purpose, he knows he's doing wrong. He says, I'll follow, this one night away, and I'll follow faith like all the way to heaven. So for one thing, it's the sin of thinking as a Christian, you can leave your faith for a little bit. Everywhere you go, your faith is there. Remember, he gets out in the woods and there is faith. She is where he is. But at least one scholar thinks it's the sin of presumption. He wasn't going out there to sell out to Satan. He was going out there to match wits with Satan, and he was only half armed. He thought he could go out and tell Satan, no, I'm not going to go along with your evil ways, and then go back to town right away, and all would be well. And he would have proved once again how super Christian he was. Just another sign of election, right? It's a sign of how great I am. Remember the temptation of Christ when he was taken up on the temple, and Satan told him to jump off, and God's angels would hold him up. And he said, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Young Goodman Brown is tempting the Lord his God. He's going out to search out for temptation, which we never do. It's not a wise thing to do. That's one answer to that. If you read the articles, there are other answers. I think that's what I was going for in the question. Point of view. This is not first person, it's third person, but it is a limited narrator, very limited. There's a lot of stuff he doesn't know, or at least he's not telling us. And that leaves us with questions at the end. Okay, so let's talk about moving from reading the story and analyzing it to writing about it. 2 big warnings, all capital letters. Do not forget this. Do not do this. Do not retell the story, and do not give me the author's bio. Retelling the story is the besetting sin of the short essay. Giving Hawthorne's bio is the besetting sin of a research paper on this story, which you might want to do. don't spend 2 pages telling me about Hawthorne. I've read the biography. There's a big thick one up on one of the upper floors. They move them around. It was on 8 at one point, maybe 9 or 7 now, on Nathaniel Hawthorne. They went to the library he went to and looked at the books he checked out. I mean, it was really thorough, so I don't need that. Also, don't just summarize the story. You can't write as well as Hawthorne. I can't write as well. If you could write as well as Hawthorne, you wouldn't be taking this class. If I could write as well as Hawthorne, I wouldn't be teaching this class. I'd be a famous author somewhere. Okay, so then what do you do? Oh, goodness gracious. All right, so the first thing I want is an opening introductory paragraph with a nice, crisp thesis. We'll have some thesis exercises to teach you how to write a thesis. For now, just know that most of us start with kind of a dull pencil. Your thesis, it's not that it's bad, it's that it's not sharp. And so in order to make it useful for writing a good essay, we need a good sharp pencil with a good sharp thesis. So we focus in and narrow down what we're going to say, not just young Goodman Brown is really good. We have to be making an argument about it. And I give you some samples right here. One really easy outline to come up with is around the colors in young Goodman Brown. Each color, each major character has a color that symbolizes them. So Brown's color, well, that would be brown. Faith's color is pink, and the devil's color is black. And so you have an introduction paragraph and 3 body paragraphs. You could talk about what really happened in the story. And there are various possibilities, but this might be more of a research paper outline because it gets pretty detailed. One, you can argue that it all really happened. 2, you could argue it was all a dream, or you could talk about that possibility. 3, you could say it doesn't really matter what was real. And I guess 3 and 4 are kind of the same. Not knowing is the point. Hawthorne doesn't want us to know, therefore we don't know, because that's the kind of story he wrote. Also, you could write about the setting, Salem and all the stuff we talked about, you know, town representing versus wilderness being, you know, Salem is order, harmony, hierarchy. The good people are up on the pedestal. The bad people are looked down upon. There's Hester Prynne over there with her scarlet letter and her little brat. And then out in the wilderness, Hester's really popular, right? And she and Faith, what are they doing over there? Oh my God. All this chaos, discord, wildness, and sexual acting out is implied, although, you know, it's 19th century, so he doesn't go into it too much. You could also talk about the symbolism of the names. You know, what does Brown symbolize? Young Goodman Brown. What does the name Faith symbolize? What about the devil? You know, the stuff we talked about when we talked about Allegory. All right. Do y'all have any questions?
Not that I can think of.
With our article analysis, will we do a conclusion?
What's that? You were breaking up.
With our article analysis, will we do a conclusion paragraph as well?
The conclusion paragraph is the one where you answer those questions.
Okay.
Now, this is the only time we will do this kind of essay. So once we get past it, don't try to do the same thing with the other essays. The others are analysis all the way through. This one is summary and analysis, just because it's a way of kind of taking notes. So here's the questions you answer in the last paragraph. All right, anything else?
How long
Wait,
is the paper supposed to be?
What's that?
How long is the research paper supposed to be?
Let's see, they've got a set length, 2,300 words. And Word will do a word count. If you're doing it in Google Docs, I'm sure they will too. I don't know anything about Google Docs.
Wait, so I'm confused.
Yes.
So was those outlines like in case we choose this story to analyze?
Those are sample outlines about how you could write about young Goodman Brown, because people are always saying, well, how do I write about this stuff without summarizing? I think I have some more.
Are we doing this with our groups?
No. Group is something else. We'll do the group. We'll introduce the group soon when we have more time. I don't want to talk for an hour and a half and then start the groups one day when I don't talk so much.
So when is the review of the scholarly article due?
It's all in the syllabus. Let's take a look. I think it's period 2 of week 2. So next week, is that right?
I think you said last class the 23rd, which is Wednesday.
Okay, I could probably give y'all till Friday night, because that'll give you, maybe Saturday night, and that'll give you all the part of the weekend to work on it and me part of the weekend to grade it. So September 26th. And if you're busy on the weekend, you just do it in the week. But some people are, they have more time on the weekend to do this kind of stuff.
What are we turning in on the 26th?
The peer-reviewed article, do you see the screen still?
Yes, I got you.
And then the
So
next...
that's our first thing to turn in, right?
Yes. And then a week from that day, you'll turn in your essay on fiction. So...
And what were you saying we would do Friday?
Not this Friday, but next Friday, the peer-reviewed article. See on the, look at the screen.
Is there like a list of articles, or do we just, like...
No, go over the syllabus and see if there's anything in it you want to write a research paper about. And if not, you can check the table of contents from the book we did not buy.
Okay.
And then you look up your article on JSTOR at the library website. And if you're off campus, you log in using Moodle login protocol. Try to pick somebody that's old and famous. As opposed to somebody that's like Walt Whitman. He's real old. He's real famous. Robert Frost. I think Dorothy Parker. These are all old. Some of the, some of those are more recent. And so they probably won't have enough articles on them to write a research paper yet.
Got it.
If you recognize the name and the story or poem, there's a good chance there's enough stuff to write about it. Also, you can look at my Louisiana anthology page and pick out something to write about. And there you probably need to talk to me about helping you find resources on it, because there's not as much that's been done about that. Like here's Paul Lawrence Dunbar. His wife, Alice Dunbar was from New Orleans, and she wrote a pretty good bit of stuff. But she's not in this book, but she's in my anthology, so you can look at that. And to get there, you just go to my homepage and click on that and authors and get the big list of stuff. And again, the more famous and old they are, the more likely, like Chopin. There's a lot of stuff on her, and we've got a lot of her stories. Cottrell, he's writing right now. I think he's a young guy teaching down at Southeastern. And so there won't be many secondary sources you can use for that. All right, anything else? So pick what you want to write about for your research paper, and then find an article, a peer-reviewed article, usually at JSTOR. You can use MLA. Some of them, you know, they only have some of their articles linked up, though, and JSTOR has all the articles linked up. All right, well, I'll see you guys next week.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks. Don't get sick. No COVID parties. Did y'all see the dude? I don't know what college he was at, but the cop comes. They've got too many people in the house, and he's like, oh, sorry, dude. And then the cop looks at his ID and says, you're here. It says you've got COVID. You've been exposed to COVID. Oh, yeah, I have. Oh, you're not supposed to be having parties. Yeah, but I didn't leave the house. Oh, my God. You're not supposed to have people in either. So just be safe out there.
Oh, God bless.
Oh, my God. I feel like I'm getting COVID. Where's my mask?
Got the coronavirus.
Got the corona. Yeah, got the Rona.
Man, we got that COVID going on.
Oh, man. Is there an outbreak at Tech yet?
There needs to be. I'm ready to get the Ritter.
No, but if you get it, you get put up in Cottingham or something if you're a guy, and you're basically in prison for the next 2 weeks.
Oh, my God. And nothing could go wrong with that, right?
Oh, no.
And that's only if they find out. So anyway. That's why we're doing this online. I'm too old to get this. It'll just kill me. And then who would grade your finals, right? See you guys.